Natalie Parker's hand trembled as she stared at her phone screen, the unknown number still flashing. She hadn't meant to answer it. She never answered unknown calls, but she'd been expecting news about her job application all week, and desperation had overridden caution. Now the deep voice on the other end of the line had her frozen in place, standing in the middle of her tiny apartment kitchen with breakfast burning on the stove. Ms. Wilson? Hello? Are you there? Is this ultrasound really yours? The voice was authoritative, clearly accustomed to being obeyed. Natalie opened her mouth to correct him, to explain he had the wrong number, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way her life had been falling apart lately. Fired from her administrative position at Meridian Healthcare after budget cuts, 3 months behind on rent, and the growing pile of medical bills from her mother's cancer treatments sitting on her counter. Or maybe it was just curiosity about what kind of person sent ultrasound images to their boss. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? She managed, buying time while her mind raced. The ultrasound image you emailed me last night. Is it really yours, Ms. Wilson? The man sounded impatient now, but there was something else in his tone. Concern, perhaps? Natalie's eggs were now completely charred, the smell filling her small kitchen, but she couldn't move. I think there's been some misunderstanding, she began carefully. Look, Jessica, if you sent this to gain my sympathy for more time off, we need to have a serious conversation. But if it's legitimate, he paused, and Natalie heard him take a deep breath. If it's legitimate, then we need to talk about your options and how the company can support you. Jessica Wilson. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Natalie tried to place it as she finally moved to turn off the stove, scraping her ruined breakfast into the trash. Then it clicked. Jessica Wilson had been in HR at Meridian, the same company that had laid Natalie off. They'd never been close, but Natalie remembered her as kind during the exit interview, apologizing profusely for the company's decision. This is not Jessica, Natalie finally said, her voice stronger now. You have the wrong number. Silence stretched for several seconds before the man spoke again. I apologize for the confusion. May I ask who I'm speaking with? Natalie Parker, former administrative assistant at Meridian Healthcare. She hadn't meant to add that last part, but something about his voice, commanding yet somehow warm, made her want to explain herself. Another pause. Natalie Parker. Wait, you were let go during the restructuring last quarter, in Dr. Mason's department. A chill ran down Natalie's spine. Yes, how did you... I'm Jackson Reed, CEO of Meridian. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Jackson Reed, the mysterious CEO who everyone talked about, but few had actually met. He'd taken over the company 2 years ago, and immediately began making changes, some popular, others less so. The layoffs had been part of his strategic realignment, according to the corporate email Natalie had received alongside her termination notice. Mr. Reed, I'm sorry for the confusion. I'll let you go so you can reach Jessica. Wait, he said quickly. Natalie Parker, I remember your file. Exceptional performance reviews, specialized in patient coordination for oncology. Dr. Mason fought hard to keep you. Natalie blinked in surprise. The CEO had reviewed her file personally. That's correct. And yet you were let go. His voice had taken on a thoughtful quality. An oversight in our restructuring algorithm. Numbers don't always tell the full story. An awkward silence fell between them. Natalie didn't know how to respond. Was the CEO of a major healthcare company actually apologizing to her? And what about Jessica and her ultrasound? Mr. Reed, about Jessica. Yes, of course, I should try to reach her. He cleared his throat. But before I go, Miss Parker, are you currently employed? The question caught her off guard. No, I'm still looking. The healthcare job market is tight right now. It is, he agreed. But as it happens, I'm in need of an executive assistant, someone with healthcare experience and exceptional organizational skills. Would you be interested in interviewing for the position? Natalie nearly dropped her phone. You don't even know me. I know your work record. I know Dr. Mason's assessment of your abilities. That's enough to warrant an interview at least. He paused. Unless you're no longer interested in working for Meridian after how things ended. It was a fair question. Natalie had spent weeks angry at the company, at the faceless executives who had decided her job was dispensable. But her mother's treatments weren't getting any cheaper, and pride wouldn't pay the bills. I would be very interested, Mr. Reed. Excellent. Can you come to the main office today at 2 p.m., 20th floor? Tell security you're there to see me. Before she could respond, a notification chime sounded on his end of the call. Ah, he said, his voice changing. Jessica just texted me. Apparently she sent her ultrasound to me by mistake. It was meant for her husband. Mystery solved. He chuckled. Sometimes mistakes lead to unexpected opportunities, don't they, Miss Parker? I'll see you at 2. The call ended, and Natalie stood motionless in her kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. A wrong number had somehow led to a job interview with the CEO of Meridian Healthcare, the very company that had laid her off 3 months ago. As she rushed to her closet to find something appropriate to wear, Natalie's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, the same one that had just called her. Miss Parker, one more thing. The position pays $95,000 annually with full benefits, effective immediately upon hiring. I believe that's substantially more than your previous compensation. Looking forward to our meeting. J.R. Natalie sat down hard on the edge of her bed, staring at the message. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. Wrong numbers didn't lead to life-changing job offers from powerful CEOs. Yet 3 hours later, she found herself stepping into the gleaming lobby of Meridian Healthcare's headquarters, her heart pounding as she approached the security desk. The guard checked her ID, made a quick call, and then directed her to a private elevator. Mr. Reed is expecting you, Miss Parker, he said with a nod of respect that she'd never received during her previous time at the company. As the elevator climbed toward the 20th floor, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite adding up. Why would the CEO personally call an employee about an ultrasound? Why was he so quick to offer her an interview with a salary already determined based on a wrong number? And why did she have the distinct impression that Jackson Reed had recognized her name immediately, long before he'd mentioned reviewing her file? The elevator doors opened directly into a sleek reception area, where a professional-looking woman greeted her with a warm smile. Miss Parker, welcome back to Meridian. I'm Claire, Mr. Reed's current assistant. He's asked me to show you in right away. As Natalie followed Claire toward a set of imposing double doors, she couldn't help but wonder what she was walking into, and whether this mistake might turn out to be the best wrong number she'd ever answered. The double doors to Jackson Reed's office swung open, revealing a space that defied Natalie's expectations. Instead of the sterile, minimalist design favored by most executives, his office was warm and inviting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city, but it was the wall of photographs that caught her attention. Patients of all ages smiling, many alongside medical staff in Meridian uniforms. Miss Parker, please come in. Jackson Reed rose from behind his desk, extending his hand. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples, and keen blue eyes that studied her with unnerving intensity. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mr. Reed, Natalie said, shaking his hand firmly despite her nerves. Please call me Jackson. He gestured toward a comfortable seating area near the windows. I prefer to conduct interviews in a more relaxed setting, if that's all right with you. As they settled into the chairs, Natalie noticed a folder on the table between them. Her employee file, she realized with a start. It was considerably thicker than she would have expected. I took the liberty of reviewing your complete employment history with us after our call, Jackson explained, following her gaze. Your record is even more impressive upon closer inspection. 5 years with Meridian, consistently excellent performance reviews, and several commendations from patients in the oncology department. Natalie shifted uncomfortably. If my record was so impressive, why was I let go? The direct question seemed to please him. Fair point. The truth is, the restructuring was handled primarily through analytics. The algorithm identified departments that could be streamlined, and unfortunately, your position was flagged as redundant. He leaned forward. It was a mistake, one of many I've been working to correct. By personally calling employees about ultrasound images? The words slipped out before Natalie could stop them, and she immediately regretted her boldness. To her surprise, Jackson laughed. No, that was genuinely a mix-up. Jessica Wilson is our HR director, and apparently she was trying to send her first ultrasound to her husband, Ryan. She's only just found out she's pregnant. His expression sobered. But it did make me realize how disconnected I've become from the people who make this company work. He stood and walked to the wall of photographs. When I took over Meridian 2 years ago, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. The previous leadership had prioritized profits over patients, and we were losing both. I made difficult decisions to save the company, including the restructuring that cost you your job. Natalie remained silent, watching him carefully. There was genuine regret in his voice, but also something else, a determination that seemed deeply personal. What I didn't anticipate, he continued, was how algorithms and analytics would fail to capture the human element of our work. We lost good people, people like you, and it's affected our patient care. He turned back to face her. That's why I need someone like you as my executive assistant. Someone who understands healthcare from the ground up, who can help me reconnect with what matters most in this business, people. It sounded rehearsed, like something from a corporate mission statement, but the intensity in his eyes suggested sincerity. Still, Natalie couldn't quite shake her suspicion. Why me specifically? There must be dozens of qualified candidates with similar backgrounds. Jackson returned to his seat, considering her for a moment before responding. Your file mentions that your mother is a patient in our oncology department, Patricia Parker, stage 3 breast cancer, currently undergoing experimental treatment under Dr. Lewis. Natalie stiffened. Yes. What does that have to do with this position? Everything. Jackson's voice softened. During my review of departments most affected by our cuts, oncology stood out. Patient satisfaction scores have dropped significantly in the past 3 months. When I investigated further, I discovered that one of the key factors was the loss of an administrative assistant who had been exceptionally skilled at coordinating complex care schedules and making patients feel supported. He tapped her file. That was you, Natalie. Patients mentioned you by name in their feedback after you left. The nice young woman who always remembered my grandchildren's names. The assistant who found me a ride when my son couldn't pick me up. The only person who could explain my insurance coverage in words I could understand. Natalie felt a lump forming in her throat. She'd always tried to go above and beyond for the patients, especially those like her mother who were fighting for their lives while navigating the labyrinthine healthcare system. So this isn't really about being your executive assistant, is it? She asked quietly. Jackson smiled. Perceptive. The title is executive assistant to the CEO, but a significant portion of your role would involve implementing a new patient advocacy program. I want to start with oncology and eventually expand throughout the hospital. Who better to help design it than someone who understands both the administrative side and the patient experience? For the first time since entering his office, Natalie felt her skepticism begin to fade. This made sense. It explained both the generous salary and why he'd been so quick to offer her the position. And my mother's treatment? I need to be honest, Mr. Reed. One of my biggest concerns since being laid off has been how to afford her care. Jackson nodded solemnly. I anticipated that question. As part of your compensation package, Meridian would cover any treatments for your mother not already included in her insurance plan, including the experimental therapy. Natalie's breath caught. The experimental treatment alone cost thousands of dollars per month, money she simply didn't have. That's extraordinarily generous. It's good business, Jackson countered, though his expression remained compassionate. Meridian should take care of its own. That includes the families of our employees. He paused. There's something else you should know, Natalie. She tensed, waiting for the catch, the fine print that would make this opportunity less miraculous than it seemed. Your mother's oncologist, Dr. Lewis, was my wife's doctor as well. The revelation hung in the air between them. Natalie searched his face, understanding dawning slowly. Your wife had cancer. Jackson's gaze drifted to a small silver frame on his desk, the only personal item in the otherwise professional space. Amy was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer 4 years ago. She fought harder than anyone I've ever known, but we lost her just before I took over Meridian. He met Natalie's eyes again. That's why I bought the company, to change it from the inside. Suddenly the wall of patient photos made sense. The personal interest in the oncology department. The determination to fix the mistakes made during restructuring. I'm so sorry, Natalie said softly. I had no idea. Most people don't. The board thought it would appear as a conflict of interest if my personal connection became public knowledge. He straightened in his chair, visibly pulling himself back to the present. But I wanted you to understand why this position, and finding the right person for it matters so much to me. Natalie felt as though she was seeing Jackson Reed clearly for the first time, not as the cold corporate CEO who had authorized her layoff, but as a man with his own painful history, trying to create meaning from loss. "When can you start?" he asked, his professional demeanor returning. The question caught her off guard. "Don't you want to ask me more interview questions? Check my references." Jackson smiled. "I've already spoken to Dr. Mason and reviewed your entire work history. But if you need more convincing..." He slid a document across the table. "This is the preliminary outline for the patient advocacy program. I'd value your input on what's missing." As Natalie scanned the document, her administrative experience kicked in. She could already see gaps, areas where patients would fall through the cracks, processes that would create more bureaucracy instead of less. "This needs work," she said without thinking, then glanced up in alarm at her own candor. Jackson's smile widened. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, so again, when can you start?" A week ago, Natalie would have jumped at this opportunity without hesitation. Now, despite everything she'd learned, a small voice of caution remained. Something still felt too convenient, too perfectly aligned with exactly what she needed. "I'd like to start Monday," she said carefully. "But I have one condition." Jackson raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued rather than offended. "Which is?" "I want to speak with Jessica Wilson before accepting the position." His expression revealed nothing, but Natalie thought she detected a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or respect, in his eyes. "May I ask why?" "Because this all started with her ultrasound and a wrong number," Natalie replied steadily, "and before I commit to this position, I'd like to make sure that part of the story checks out." For a moment, Jackson simply studied her, his face unreadable. Then he reached for his phone. "Claire, could you ask Jessica Wilson to join us in my office?" "Yes, right away." He ended the call and turned back to Natalie. "She'll be here in a few minutes. I appreciate your thoroughness, Ms. Parker. It's another quality that makes you perfect for this role." As they waited for Jessica to arrive, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something important, some piece of the puzzle that would explain why Jackson Reed, CEO of Meridian Healthcare, had taken such a personal interest in her return to the company. The knock on the door came sooner than Natalie expected. Jessica Wilson entered with the confident stride of an executive, her stylish business attire unable to completely disguise the subtle curve of her abdomen. Her professional smile faltered momentarily when she spotted Natalie. "Natalie Parker? I didn't expect to see you here," Jessica said, genuine surprise in her voice as she crossed the room to shake Natalie's hand. "It's good to see you again." "Jessica, thank you for coming," Jackson said, gesturing for her to join them. "I'm in the process of hiring Ms. Parker as my new executive assistant, and she had a question about something that happened this morning." Jessica looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "Of course. How can I help?" Natalie felt suddenly awkward. Put into words, her suspicions seemed paranoid, even ridiculous. "This morning, Mr. Reed called me by accident, thinking I was you. He mentioned receiving an ultrasound image that you'd sent him." Recognition dawned on Jessica's face, followed by a flush of embarrassment. "Oh, that was such a mortifying mistake. I was trying to send it to my husband, Ryan, and somehow selected Jackson's contact instead." She laughed nervously. "I nearly died when I realized what I'd done. I sent him a text right away to explain." "Which I received," Jackson confirmed, "right after discovering I'd called the wrong number trying to reach you." The explanation matched exactly what Jackson had told her earlier. Natalie felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by embarrassment at her suspicion. "I'm sorry for asking," she began, but Jessica waved her off. "No, it's completely understandable. It sounds like a strange coincidence." She glanced at Jackson. "And knowing how our CEO operates, I can imagine it might have seemed orchestrated." Jackson had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I have been known to take unconventional approaches to recruitment. Like the time you accidentally spilled coffee on Dr. Michaels at that conference just so you could introduce yourself," Jessica teased, clearly comfortable enough with her boss to poke fun at him. "That was genuinely an accident," Jackson protested, though his smile suggested otherwise. The easy rapport between them further eased Natalie's concerns. This didn't feel like a performance for her benefit. "Well, I should get back to work," Jessica said. "We have orientation for new hires this afternoon." She paused, looking at Natalie. Perhaps I'll be seeing you there on Monday. Natalie glanced at Jackson, who raised an expectant eyebrow. The last of her reservations melted away. Yes, I believe you will. After Jessica left, Jackson extended his hand. Welcome to Meridian Healthcare, Ms. Parker. Or rather, welcome back. Thank you, Mr. Reed. I look forward to working with you. They shook hands, the agreement sealed. I'll have Claire email you all the necessary paperwork and details about Monday. He walked her to the door. And Natalie, I admire your caution. It's a quality that will serve us both well. As Natalie rode the elevator down to the lobby, her mind whirled with everything that had happened. In the span of 6 hours, she'd gone from unemployed and desperate to having a high-paying job with benefits that would cover her mother's treatments. It felt surreal, like the plot of a movie rather than her actual life. Outside the Meridian building, the spring sunshine warmed her face as she called her mother to share the news. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Patricia Parker's voice, though weakened by treatments, carried genuine joy. I always said things happen for a reason. Maybe you're right, Mom, Natalie replied, smiling as she hailed a taxi. I should be finished with the paperwork soon. I thought I'd stop by the hospital afterward to celebrate. Actually, I'm having a good day. Dr. Lewis said I could go home this afternoon if my numbers stay stable. Why don't you come to the house instead? I'll order from that Thai place you like. Sounds perfect. I'll see you in a couple of hours. Natalie spent the next hour at a coffee shop, methodically completing the electronic onboarding forms Claire had already sent to her email. The efficiency impressed her. Jackson Reed clearly didn't waste time once decisions were made. Among the standard employment documents was a detailed description of her role. As Jackson had explained, she would split her time between traditional executive assistant duties and developing the new patient advocacy program. The latter would involve considerable autonomy and the authority to implement changes across departments, far more responsibility than she'd had in her previous position. Just as she finished the last form, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Parker, Jackson Reed here. One more thing. I've arranged temporary parking for you in the executive garage until your permanent pass is ready. The code is 5429. See you Monday. Natalie stared at the message. How had he gotten her number? She hadn't included it on any of the forms yet. She quickly scrolled through their earlier conversation, confirming that she had never given it to him during their call either. A prickle of unease returned. She considered texting back to ask, then decided against it. It was probably in her old employee records. Still, the coincidences were beginning to pile up in ways that made her slightly uncomfortable. When she arrived at her mother's modest bungalow later that afternoon, she found Patricia settled on the couch with a colorful knit blanket draped over her legs. Despite the weight loss and the headscarf covering her hair loss, her mother's eyes were bright with excitement. Tell me everything, Patricia insisted as Natalie unpacked the Thai food containers. How did this miracle job offer happen? Natalie recounted the strange sequence of events. The wrong number, the ultrasound mix-up, the interview that wasn't really an interview. As she spoke, her mother's expression shifted from joy to something more cautious. And you're sure this is legitimate? Patricia asked. It all seems rather convenient. That's what I thought too, Natalie admitted, handing her mother a plate of pad thai. But I spoke with Jessica Wilson, the woman whose ultrasound started this whole thing, and her story matched exactly what Jackson told me. Besides, it's Meridian Healthcare. It's not like it's some sketchy startup. Patricia nodded slowly. And this CEO, he's offering to cover my treatments as part of your compensation. Yes. Apparently his wife died of breast cancer a few years ago. That's why he bought Meridian in the first place. He wants to improve patient care, especially in oncology. His wife, Patricia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What was her name? Amy, I think. Why? A strange expression crossed Patricia's face. Do you remember when I first started treatment? There was a woman who used to sit next to me during chemotherapy. Amy Reed. We became friendly. She'd bring crossword puzzles for us to solve together while the drugs dripped. She set her fork down. She passed away about 2 years ago. Natalie felt a chill run through her. Did she ever mention her husband? Jack, she called him Jack, said he was some kind of financial investor. Patricia's brow furrowed. I think I met him once or twice when he came to pick her up. Tall man, dark hair with a bit of grey. Very devoted to her. The description matched Jackson Reed perfectly. Natalie's mind raced, trying to process this new information. If Jackson's wife had been her mother's chemo companion, then he must have known who Natalie was all along. But why not mention the connection? "Mom, did you ever talk about me to Amy? About my job at Meridian?" Patricia thought for a moment. "I'm sure I did. I was so proud when you got that position, and I probably talked about how helpful you were with all my medical paperwork." She frowned slightly. "Natalie, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking there's more to this job offer than Jackson Reed is telling me," Natalie said slowly. "The wrong number called this morning. I don't think it was a coincidence at all. But the HR woman confirmed it was a mistake, didn't she? Yes, but what if Jessica was in on it? What if Jackson engineered the whole thing?" Even as she said it, Natalie realized how paranoid it sounded. Why would the CEO of a major healthcare company go to such elaborate lengths to hire her specifically? Patricia reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, sometimes good things happen for simple reasons. Maybe Jackson remembered you from Amy's treatments and recognized your name when the layoffs happened. Maybe he feels guilty about letting you go when his wife's friend's daughter was affected." "Maybe," Natalie conceded, though doubt lingered. "But I can't shake the feeling that there's something he's not telling me." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Then find out what it is. You've always been good at getting to the truth of things. Just don't let suspicion rob you of what could be a wonderful opportunity." Later that night, after making sure her mother was comfortably settled, Natalie sat at her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her determined face. If there was more to the story of Jackson Reed's interest in her, she would uncover it before Monday. She began by searching for information about Amy Reed, finding a touching obituary that mentioned her brave battle with breast cancer and her marriage to Jackson Reed, who purchased Meridian Healthcare in her honor. The timeline matched what Jackson had told her. Next, she looked into the company's financial records since Jackson's takeover. True to his word, Meridian had been struggling before his purchase, and he'd implemented significant changes, including the restructuring that had cost Natalie her job. But the most recent quarterly report showed a remarkable turnaround, with patient satisfaction scores climbing and financial stability returning. Everything checked out, yet her instincts continued to whisper that she was missing something important. As midnight approached, Natalie found herself scrolling through Meridian's press releases from the past year. One headline caught her eye: "Meridian Healthcare launches Breakthrough Cancer Research Initiative in partnership with Reed Foundation." The article, dated just 3 weeks ago, detailed a major research project focused on developing new treatments for aggressive breast cancers, funded entirely by the Reed Foundation, a private charity established by Jackson Reed in his late wife's memory. And there, in the final paragraph, was the missing piece. The initiative will be led by Dr. James Lewis, who previously treated Mrs. Reed, and will build upon promising research begun in clinical trials last year, trials that have shown particular success in patients with genetic profiles similar to the late Mrs. Reed's. Natalie stared at the screen, the truth dawning with startling clarity. Her mother was part of those clinical trials under Dr. Lewis, trials funded by Jackson Reed, designed to develop treatments that might have saved his wife if discovered sooner. Patricia Parker wasn't just any patient. She was a test subject for the treatment Jackson was passionate about advancing, a treatment that might help countless women in the future. And Natalie had just agreed to work directly for the man funding it all. Monday morning arrived with a clarity Natalie hadn't felt in months. After a weekend of research and reflection, she'd made her decision about Jackson Reed and the position at Meridian Healthcare. As she rode the elevator to the 20th floor, she rehearsed what she would say when she saw him. The doors opened to reveal Claire packing her desk, carefully placing framed photos into a cardboard box. "Good morning, Natalie," Claire greeted her warmly. "Mr. Reed is expecting you. He's asked that you go right in." "You're leaving?" Natalie asked, surprised by the immediate transition. Claire smiled. "Being promoted, actually. Director of Administrative Services, a new position Jackson created. I'll be overseeing the implementation of the patient advocacy program across departments once you've designed it." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I think he's been planning this restructuring for months. Your arrival was the final piece that aligned with Natalie's discoveries. Jackson Reed didn't leave anything to chance, including, apparently, her recruitment." She thanked Claire and approached the imposing double doors with renewed determination. Jackson was standing at the windows when she entered, gazing out at the city below. He turned at the sound of the door, his expression brightening. "Natalie, welcome. I trust you had a restful weekend?" He gestured to a sleek desk positioned near his own. "Your workstation is ready. I thought we'd start by reviewing the patient advocacy framework together." "Before we begin," Natalie said firmly, "I need to ask you something." Jackson's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. Did you know my mother was Amy's friend from chemotherapy when you offered me this job?" The question hung between them. Jackson's expression shifted through surprise, consideration, and finally resignation. "Yes," he admitted. "I recognized your name immediately during our call." "So the wrong number wasn't a coincidence," Natalie pressed. "You orchestrated the whole thing." Jackson sighed and moved to the seating area, indicating for her to join him. "Not exactly. The mix-up with Jessica's ultrasound was genuinely an accident. But when I realized I had called you instead of her, yes, I saw an opportunity and took it. Why the elaborate charade? Why not just call and offer me the position directly?" "Would you have accepted?" Jackson countered. "If the CEO who authorized your layoff suddenly called with a too-good-to-be-true job offer, wouldn't you have been suspicious?" He had a point. Natalie would have assumed there was a catch, or that he wanted something she couldn't provide. "Besides," he continued, "I needed to see how you would handle an unexpected situation. Your response, thoughtful, cautious, yet open to possibility, confirmed what I already believed about you." "Based on what? My mother's stories, my employment record?" "Both," Jackson acknowledged. "Amy spoke highly of Patricia's daughter who worked at Meridian and helped navigate the healthcare maze. When I took over the company and reviewed staff during restructuring, I recognized your name but didn't make the connection immediately. By the time I realized who you were, the layoff decisions had been implemented." "And you didn't reverse it?" "I considered it. But then I saw an opportunity for something better than simply reinstating your previous position." He leaned forward intently. "Natalie, what happened to you? A dedicated employee who genuinely cared about patients being laid off due to an algorithm exemplifies everything wrong with how healthcare is managed today. I wanted you not just back at Meridian, but in a position to help change the system." Natalie processed his words, finding the explanation plausible, yet still incomplete. "And my mother's experimental treatment? The one funded by your foundation?" Jackson didn't seem surprised that she'd discovered this connection. "Yes, Patricia is enrolled in trials developed from research that might have helped Amy if we'd had more time. The treatment shows remarkable promise, particularly for patients with genetic profiles similar to Amy's and your mother's." "So my mother is valuable to your research," Natalie said, the words sharper than she'd intended. "Every patient in the trial is valuable," Jackson corrected gently. "But I won't pretend there isn't a personal element to this for me. Patricia was kind to Amy during the darkest period of her life. Supporting her treatment now feels like honoring Amy's memory." He paused. "That said, your mother's participation in the trial is completely separate from your employment. Whether you accept this position or not, her place in the program is secure." Natalie studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception. Instead, she found only earnest intensity, the same expression she'd noticed during their interview when he spoke about changing Meridian from within. "There's one more thing you should know," Jackson added. "The patient advocacy program wasn't my idea originally, it was Amy's." He reached for a leather portfolio on the table and withdrew a handwritten letter, carefully preserved in a clear protective sleeve. "This was part of a letter Amy wrote to me in her final weeks. I'd like you to read it." Natalie hesitated before accepting the deeply personal document. The handwriting was shaky but determined. "Jack, when I'm gone, I need you to promise me something. The hardest part of this journey hasn't been the pain or even facing mortality. It's been the feeling of helplessness within a system that's supposed to heal. No patient should have to fight both cancer and bureaucracy. If you really go through with buying Meridian, create something new. A program where patients have advocates within the system, real people who understand both the medical and human sides of healthcare. Patricia's daughter at Meridian seems to do this instinctively. Find more people like her. Build something that makes the unbearable a little more bearable for those who come after me." Natalie carefully returned the letter, a lump forming in her throat. "I had no idea." "Few people do," Jackson said quietly. "I've spent 2 years preparing Meridian for this transformation, cutting costs where possible, improving efficiency, building the financial foundation needed to support patient-centered innovations that don't immediately generate profit. He met her eyes directly. I need someone who understands Amy's vision from the inside out, someone who's lived both sides of healthcare, as a provider and as family to a patient. The pieces finally aligned in Natalie's mind, forming a picture more complex but ultimately more hopeful than she'd imagined. Jackson Reed hadn't manipulated her into taking this position out of charity or obligation to her mother. He truly believed she was the right person to help implement a vision born from his wife's suffering, a vision that could transform patients' experiences at Meridian and perhaps beyond. "So," Jackson said, watching her carefully, "now that you know everything, are you still interested in the position?" Natalie took a deep breath. "Yes, but with one condition." "Name it." "Complete transparency moving forward. No more orchestrated coincidences or hidden motivations. If we're going to work together on something this important, I need to know you're being straight with me." Jackson extended his hand. "Agreed. Partners in transformation?" "Partners," Natalie confirmed, shaking his hand with newfound confidence. 6 months later, Natalie stood at the podium in Meridian's largest conference room, addressing the assembled department heads and medical staff. Behind her, a screen displayed the logo for the newly launched Amy Reed Patient Advocacy Program. Today marks the official implementation of a program that reimagines how we support patients through their healthcare journey, she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Over the past 6 months, we've piloted this approach in oncology with remarkable results. Patient satisfaction scores have increased by 38%, treatment compliance has improved by 42%, and perhaps most importantly, patients report feeling seen and supported as people, not just medical cases." From the front row, Jackson nodded encouragingly. Beside him sat Patricia Parker, now in remission following the successful completion of her treatment protocol. The experimental therapy funded by the Reed Foundation had proven so effective that it was being fast-tracked for broader clinical trials. Starting next month, every department at Meridian will have dedicated patient advocates, trained not just in medical administration, but in empathetic communication and navigation of healthcare systems, Natalie continued. These advocates will serve as bridges between patients, medical teams and administration, ensuring that no one feels lost or forgotten within our walls. As she detailed the implementation plan she'd spent months developing, Natalie couldn't help but reflect on the strange path that had led her here. A wrong number, an ultrasound meant for someone else, a connection between two women united by the same devastating disease, all converging to create something meaningful from tragedy. After the presentation, as staff members approached with questions and congratulations, Jackson made his way to her side. "Amy would be proud," he said quietly. "This is exactly what she hoped for." "I think she'd be proud of both of us," Natalie replied. "Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected beginnings." Later that evening, as Natalie helped her mother into her apartment for their weekly dinner tradition, Patricia squeezed her hand. "You know, when I was sitting in those chemotherapy sessions with Amy, complaining about how confusing all the paperwork was, I never imagined her husband would one day give my daughter a job that would change things for patients everywhere." She smiled, the color in her cheeks a welcome sign of her returning health. "It's like she's still helping people, through both of you." Natalie thought about the chain of events that had led her here, from the devastation of losing her job, to the uncertainty of that strange phone call, to discovering her purpose in transforming patient care. What had begun with a simple mistake, answering a call about an ultrasound that wasn't hers, had blossomed into something far more significant than she could have imagined. "Mom," Natalie said, setting plates on the table for their meal. "Remember how you always said things happen for a reason?" Patricia nodded, her eyes twinkling. "And was I right?" Natalie thought of Jackson Reed, of Amy's letter, of the patients whose lives were already changing because of the advocacy program. She thought of her mother's remission and the treatments that would help countless other women facing the same diagnosis. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe you were." As they sat down to dinner, Natalie's phone buzzed with a text message from Jackson. "Just received the board's approval for Phase 2 funding. The Amy Reed Patient Advocacy Program is officially expanding to all 5 Meridian hospitals across the state. None of this would be possible without you. Thank you for answering that call." Natalie smiled as she read the message. Some wrong numbers, it seemed, were exactly right. The leather-bound journal sat abandoned on the corner table of Riverside Cafe, its pages slightly ruffled by the autumn breeze flowing through the open windows. Jackson Hayes noticed it immediately as he settled into his usual spot, the prime corner table he'd reserved every Thursday morning for the past 3 months. Even as the 34-year-old tech mogul worth billions, he preferred this quaint cafe in downtown Portland for its anonymity and exceptional coffee. "Your usual, mister. Hayes black Americano and avocado toast?" asked Mia, the barista who had long stopped being starstruck by his presence. "Perfect. Thanks," Jackson replied, his attention already drawn to the forgotten diary. Its worn burgundy cover and frayed ribbon bookmark suggested it was well used and likely treasured. After Mia walked away, he reached for it, telling himself he was just checking for identification to return it to its owner. The first page contained only a name written in elegant cursive, "Property of Abigail Bennett." The name struck him like a physical blow. Jackson's fingers trembled as he traced the familiar handwriting. Abigail Bennett, the woman he'd let slip away 12 years ago during his hungry climb to success. The one who had warned him that his ambition would eventually leave him wealthy, but hollow. Against his better judgment, Jackson flipped through the pages. This wasn't just any diary. It contained sketches, quotes, and daily reflections. His ethical compass wavered, but curiosity overpowered his reservations when he spotted his own name on a recent entry. October 7th, moved back to Portland after 10 years away. Spotted Jackson at Pioneer Square yesterday. He didn't see me, surrounded by his entourage. He's exactly as I imagined. Successful, powerful, untouchable. The boy who once promised me the moon now owns the rockets to get there. Some promises are better left broken. Jackson closed the diary, his heart pounding. Abigail was back in Portland. The same Abigail who had once been his college sweetheart, his first love, his would-be fiancée before he'd chosen his startup over their relationship. She'd been his moral compass, the voice of reason, the woman who saw beyond his potential to the flaws he tried to hide. "Here you go," Mia said, setting down his order and glancing at the diary. "Someone left that earlier. Pretty girl with auburn hair. Said she might come back for it." Jackson nodded, trying to appear casual. "Auburn hair? Tall, with freckles across her nose? That's her. Comes in most mornings. Always orders a chai latte and writes in that diary." He thanked Mia with an overly generous tip and stared at the journal. The right thing would be to leave it with the staff. Instead, he opened it again, justifying his invasion of privacy as necessary reconnaissance. The entries chronicled Abigail's return to Portland after accepting a position as creative director at a local publishing house. She mentioned a recent breakup with someone named Daniel, described reconnecting with old friends, and repeatedly referenced a project called Phoenix that seemed important to her. What struck Jackson most were the undertones of lingering pain when she wrote about their past. In one entry, she'd written, "Success means different things to different people. For some, it's a bank account with many zeros. For others, it's waking up next to someone who makes your heart feel full." Jackson chose his definition. I chose mine. As he read further, guilt and regret washed over him. The entries revealed a woman who had moved forward with her life but carried scars from their relationship. Jackson had experienced tremendous success building his tech empire, but personal fulfillment had remained elusive. His last relationship had ended 6 months ago with familiar accusations about his emotional unavailability. A new entry caught his attention. Received an invitation to the Hammond Foundation Gala. Apparently, being creative director means schmoozing with Portland's elite. Not looking forward to playing dress-up in a room full of people who measure worth by net worth. At least the catering is supposed to be excellent. Jackson was a major donor to the Hammond Foundation and always attended their annual gala, scheduled for this Saturday. The universe was offering him a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. The cafe door chimed and Jackson looked up instinctively, his breath caught in his throat. Abigail Bennett stood at the counter, more beautiful than his memories had preserved her. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and though 12 years had passed, he would have recognized her anywhere. She was speaking animatedly with the barista, likely asking about her missing diary. In a panic, Jackson slipped the journal into his briefcase. He wasn't ready to face her yet, not without a plan. He needed time to figure out what to say, how to approach her after all these years. Through the years of therapy he'd reluctantly attended at his sister's insistence, Jackson had come to recognize his pattern of controlling situations to avoid vulnerability. This was no different. Abigail turned, scanning the cafe. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and Jackson saw the flash of recognition followed by something harder to define, perhaps wariness or resolve. She started walking toward his table with determined steps. "Jackson Hayes," she said, her voice steadier than he felt, "of all the coffee shops in all of Portland." "Abby," he responded, the old nickname slipping out before he could stop it. "It's been a long time. It's Abigail now," she corrected him gently but firmly. "No one's called me Abby in years." She glanced at the table. "I left something here earlier. My journal. Have you seen it? The barista said someone at this table might have picked it up." Jackson's mind raced. The diary sat heavy in his briefcase, practically burning a hole through the expensive leather. He should return it, confess to his snooping, and apologize. Instead, he heard himself say, "I haven't seen it, but I'll keep an eye out. Are you back in Portland for good?" A flicker of disappointment crossed her face. "Yes, I moved back last month." She hesitated. "The journal is important to me. If you do see it, could you let Mia know? My contact information is inside." "Of course," he lied, hating himself for it. "It's good to see you, Abigail." She nodded curtly. "Take care, Jackson." As she walked away, Jackson made a decision. He wouldn't lose her again, not without at least trying to make amends. The diary had given him insight into her life, her thoughts, her pain that he had caused. This time would be different. "I won't lose you this time," he whispered to himself, already formulating a plan for the Hammond Foundation Gala. With the diary as his guide, he would find a way back into Abigail's life, even if it meant confronting the man he used to be. Jackson spent the next 2 days immersed in Abigail's diary, wrestling with guilt, yet unable to stop reading. Each entry revealed layers of the woman she'd become, resilient, thoughtful, and still carrying the creative spark he'd once admired. Her writings moved between professional challenges at the publishing house, reflections on past relationships, and occasional mentions of him that always left Jackson with a hollow feeling in his chest. Project Phoenix Update read one entry from last week. The board loved the concept, a series highlighting overlooked women in history who changed the world without recognition. First volume goes to print in spring. Dad would have been proud. Jackson remembered how close Abigail had been with her father, a history professor who'd passed away during their college years. That loss had been the first real test of their relationship, one he'd failed by prioritizing an investor meeting over being present for her grief. In his penthouse overlooking the city, Jackson paced as his assistant, Tara, ran through his schedule. "The Hammond Foundation confirmed your table for Saturday," she noted. "Standard 8 seats. Should I fill them with the usual business associates?" "No," Jackson replied quickly. "Just confirm my attendance. I'm going alone." Tara's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's unusual. You always network at these events." "Not this time." He hesitated. "Could you also find out which publishing house recently hired a creative director named Abigail Bennett?" "Monarch Publishing," Tara answered without checking her tablet. "They're the ones doing that Phoenix project everyone's talking about. Innovative concept, supposed to revolutionize historical biographies for young readers." Jackson stopped pacing. "How do you know that?" "It's my job to know what's happening in Portland's business community," she replied with a shrug. "Also, they're looking for investors. Want me to set up a meeting?" "Not yet," Jackson murmured, an idea forming. "But find out everything you can about Monarch Publishing. Financial status, leadership, current projects, especially anything related to Project Phoenix." By Friday evening, Jackson had a comprehensive report on Monarch Publishing. The company had creative vision, but financial struggles, making them ripe for investment or acquisition. Project Phoenix was Abigail's brainchild, her chance to create something meaningful after years of working at larger publishing houses in New York. The diary entries about the project revealed her passion. Phoenix isn't just about books, it's about reclaiming forgotten narratives. Every girl deserves to see that greatness doesn't require recognition to be meaningful. Dad always said, history remembers those who wrote it down, not necessarily those who made it. Jackson closed the diary, conflicted about his next steps. Part of him, The ruthless businessman who'd built Hayes Technologies into a multi-billion-dollar empire saw an opportunity to get close to Abigail through a business arrangement. Another part, perhaps the remnants of the idealistic college student she'd once loved, knew such manipulation would prove he hadn't changed at all. That night, Jackson dreamed of their last day together. They'd been in his cramped apartment near campus, Abigail surrounded by half-packed boxes. "This isn't about San Francisco, Jackson," she'd said, tears streaming down her face. "It's about priorities. You didn't even discuss it with me before accepting their offer." "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," he'd argued. "We can make long-distance work for a year, and then you can join me after graduation." "Like I'm some afterthought to your grand plan?" Her voice had cracked. "What about my fellowship offer here? What about us building a life together?" "I'm building that life. This is for us, for our future." She'd shaken her head. "No, this is for you. There's a difference." In the dream, unlike reality, Jackson followed when she walked out. In reality, he'd let his pride keep him rooted in place, convinced she'd eventually understand his ambition. By the time he'd realized his mistake, she'd blocked his number and moved away. Jackson woke up Saturday morning with a clearer sense of purpose than he'd felt in years. He would return the diary at the gala, confess to reading it, and accept whatever consequences came. He'd offer to invest in Project Phoenix without strings attached, not to win her back, but because he believed in her vision. The rest would be up to her. The gala was held at the Portland Art Museum, transformed for the evening into a glittering showcase of the city's wealthiest individuals. Jackson arrived intentionally late, scanning the crowd for Abigail. He spotted her near a display of auction items, stunning in a forest green gown that contrasted with her auburn hair. She was speaking with an older man Jackson recognized as Walter Kingsley, CEO of a rival tech company. As Jackson approached, he caught a fragment of their conversation. "Exclusive digital rights would guarantee wider distribution," Walter was saying. "Monarch needs the capital, and Kingsley Tech needs content for our new education platform." "The project isn't about maximizing profit," Abigail replied firmly. "These stories deserve to exist in physical form, accessible to everyone, not locked behind a digital paywall." "Admirable ideals," Walter said with a condescending smile, "but ideals don't pay printing costs." "Perhaps I could offer an alternative perspective," Jackson interrupted, extending his hand to Abigail. "It's good to see you again." Walter's expression soured. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you without your usual entourage." "I'm full of surprises lately," Jackson replied before turning to Abigail. "Would you mind if we spoke privately for a moment? I have something that belongs to you." Curiosity overcame her initial wariness. "Excuse us, Mr. Kingsley. We can continue our discussion later." Jackson led her to a quieter corner of the museum. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, then immediately regretted the comment when her expression cooled. "What do you have that belongs to me, Jackson?" He removed the burgundy journal from his inner jacket pocket. "I should have returned this at the cafe. I'm sorry." Abigail's eyes widened as she took the diary. "You had it all along. Why would you lie about that?" "Because I recognized your name and—" "I read it," he admitted. "Not all of it, but enough to know I owe you an apology that's 12 years overdue." Her face flushed with anger. "You read my private thoughts without permission? That's—" She stopped, clutching the journal tightly. "That's exactly something the old Jackson would do. Take what he wanted without considering others." "You're right," he said quietly. "I haven't given you any reason to think I've changed, but I'd like the chance to prove that I have, or at least that I'm trying to. By eavesdropping on my business discussion? By what, swooping in to play hero against Kingsley?" Her voice trembled slightly. "I don't need saving, Jackson. My life isn't some story where the billionaire ex-boyfriend returns to fix everything. Project Phoenix deserves to exist the way you envision it," he said. "I'd like to help make that happen, no strings attached. Not to win you back or control the outcome, just because it's important work." Abigail studied him, skepticism evident in her expression. "Why should I believe you?" Jackson took a deep breath. October 15th entry. "You wrote that true change isn't about grand gestures but consistent actions that align with one's values. I can't undo the past, but I can show you who I am now through my actions. Starting with returning your diary and being honest about my mistakes." Surprise flickered across her features. "You really did read it?" "I did. And I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but if you're willing, I'd like to discuss how I can support Project Phoenix without interfering with your vision. A server passed with champagne, and Abigail took a glass, needing a moment to process. You know what's ironic? I've spent years telling myself I was completely over you. That if we ever crossed paths again, I'd feel nothing. And? Jackson asked, afraid of her answer. And I was wrong, she said softly. I feel everything: anger, disappointment, curiosity, and something else I'm not ready to name. Before Jackson could respond, Abigail's colleague approached, apologetically interrupting to mention an important potential donor who wanted to meet her. The moment was broken. We're not finished with this conversation, Abigail said, handing Jackson a business card. Monday, my office, 2 p.m. If you're serious about Project Phoenix, come prepared with ideas, not just money. She paused, then added more quietly, and Jackson? Don't read any more of my diary. As she walked away, Jackson felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with uncertainty. He had no control over this situation, no guaranteed outcome. For the first time in a long time, he would have to earn trust rather than buy it. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I won't lose you this time, he whispered to himself, tucking her card carefully into his pocket. But this time, the words felt less like a declaration of ownership and more like a promise to himself to be worthy of a second chance. Monday arrived with uncharacteristic Portland sunshine, as if the universe itself approved of new beginnings. Jackson arrived at Monarch Publishing's modest offices 15 minutes early, carrying a leather portfolio and no assistant, a deliberate choice to show Abigail he wasn't hiding behind his corporate persona. The receptionist directed him to a glass-walled conference room where Abigail was already waiting, dressed in a tailored navy blazer, her auburn hair pulled back in a professional knot. Beside her sat a bespectacled man in his 50s, who Jackson recognized from his research as Gregory Walsh, Monarch's founder and principal owner. Mr. Hayes, Gregory stood to shake his hand, enthusiasm evident. We're honored you reached out about Project Phoenix. Abigail speaks highly of your business acumen. Jackson glanced at Abigail, whose neutral expression revealed nothing. I'm intrigued by the concept, he replied carefully. Innovative educational content with social impact aligns with Hayes Technologies' community initiatives. For the next 30 minutes, Abigail outlined Project Phoenix in detail, a 12-volume series highlighting women whose contributions to science, politics, arts, and social justice had been overshadowed or erased by male counterparts. The presentation was polished and passionate, revealing how deeply she believed in the project. Our challenge, Gregory interjected, is balancing accessibility with sustainability. Traditional publishing models favor established names over innovative concepts. That's where I believe I can help. Jackson opened his portfolio. I've prepared 3 potential partnership structures that would preserve your creative control while providing the necessary capital. As they reviewed his proposals, Jackson noticed Abigail's surprise at his thorough understanding of publishing economics and his willingness to take a minimal equity position. When Gregory excused himself for another meeting, Jackson finally had a moment alone with her. You actually prepared real proposals, Abigail said, reviewing the documents again. I half expected you to show up with a blank check and expect gratitude. The old Jackson might have, he admitted. I've learned some lessons about respecting other people's expertise. She studied him, skepticism still evident. Why Project Phoenix? There are dozens of publishing startups that would give you better returns. Because it matters, he said simply. And because I know what it feels like to have a vision others can't yet see. Their conversation was interrupted when Gregory returned with unexpected company, Walter Kingsley, whose predatory smile made Jackson instantly wary. Hope you don't mind my joining, Walter said, taking a seat without invitation. Gregory mentioned you were here discussing Phoenix, and since we've been in negotiations ourselves, it seemed efficient to combine conversations. Gregory looked uncomfortable. Walter has made a compelling acquisition offer for Monarch. We haven't decided anything yet. Jackson noticed Abigail's hands tighten around her pen. This was clearly news to her. An acquisition would certainly solve your capital problems, Walter continued smoothly. And Hayes Technologies is primarily hardware and software, not content creation, different lanes entirely. The implication was clear. Back off. This is my territory. Jackson had faced enough corporate sharks to recognize the maneuver. Actually, Jackson countered, content and technology are increasingly converging. But unlike a full acquisition, my proposal allows Monarch to maintain its identity and creative direction. The tension in the room thickened as Walter outlined his competing offer, financially generous but requiring full integration into Kingsley Tech's digital education platform, effectively dismantling Monarch's independence and traditional publishing approach. When the meeting finally ended, Jackson felt the familiar rush of competitive energy, but it was tempered by concern over Abigail's unusually quiet demeanor. As they walked toward the elevator, he asked, "Are you okay?" "Gregory never mentioned Kingsley's acquisition offer," she replied, voice tight with controlled emotion. "He promised me creative control when I took this position." "Startup founders sometimes get desperate when cash runs low," Jackson said gently. "I've seen it happen. Hell, I almost sold my own company in year 3 when we hit unexpected development delays." The elevator arrived, and they stepped in together. "What stopped you?" she asked. "Remembering why I started in the first place," he answered. "It wasn't about the exit strategy. It was about building something meaningful." Abigail's shoulders slumped slightly. "Gregory talks about Phoenix being revolutionary, but maybe that was just to lure me from New York. Maybe it was always about setting up for acquisition." "For what it's worth," Jackson said as they reached the lobby, "I think your vision for Phoenix is exactly what the publishing world needs." "Coffee?" She hesitated, then nodded. "There's a place around the corner." At the small cafe, away from corporate politics, Abigail seemed to relax marginally. They found a quiet table by the window, and Jackson was struck by the parallel to their college days, when they'd spent countless hours in similar cafes, dreaming about changing the world. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said after they'd ordered. "That entry you quoted at the gala, about true change being consistent actions, not grand gestures. Why did that one stick with you?" Jackson considered his answer carefully. "Because it made me realize how often I've substituted money for genuine connection, donations instead of time, acquisitions instead of building relationships." He paused. "I've been efficient, but not meaningful." "And you want to be meaningful now?" The skepticism in her voice was tempered with genuine curiosity. "I want to try," he admitted, "starting with Project Phoenix." Their conversation shifted to the books themselves, and Jackson found himself genuinely engrossed in Abigail's vision for each volume. Her knowledge of these overlooked historical women was impressive, her passion contagious. "My father used to say history isn't what happened, but what gets remembered," she explained. These women deserve to be remembered properly. As they talked, Jackson's phone repeatedly buzzed with messages from Tara about urgent business matters. He silenced it without checking, a small action that didn't go unnoticed by Abigail. "The world won't collapse if Jackson Hayes takes an extended coffee break?" she asked with the hint of a smile. "Apparently not," he replied, returning her smile, "though my assistant might disagree." The moment of warmth between them was shattered when Abigail's own phone rang. Her expression darkened as she answered. "Gregory? Yes, I can come back now." She listened for a moment. "I understand. I'll be right there." She hung up, gathering her things quickly. "Emergency board meeting. Apparently Kingsley made a formal offer immediately after our meeting, significantly higher than his initial discussions. Gregory thinks we should take it." Jackson felt his chest tighten. "What about Phoenix?" "Kingsley says they'll still produce it, just exclusively on their digital platform." Her voice hardened. "Everything I've worked for, reduced to content for a subscription service." "Let me come with you," Jackson offered, standing. "I can make a counter-offer." "No," Abigail said firmly. "This isn't your battle, Jackson, and I won't have you swooping in with your billions to play hero." "That's not what—" "Isn't it?" she interrupted. "You've always needed to control situations, fix problems, be the smartest person in the room. Some things never change." Her words stung because they contained truth. "You're right about who I was," he acknowledged, "but this isn't about control. It's about believing in your vision." Abigail's expression softened slightly. "I need to handle this my way. If I'm going to fight for Phoenix, it has to be on my own terms." As she turned to leave, Jackson called after her, "Your diary. The entry about your father's book collection. You wrote that he left them to you because he trusted you to keep the stories alive. This is the same thing, Abigail. These women's stories deserve your advocacy." She paused, visibly surprised. You really did read every entry, didn't you? Not everyone, he admitted, but enough to know that Phoenix isn't just a project for you. It's a promise to your father, to yourself, and to all those forgotten women. Something shifted in her eyes, perhaps recognition that despite everything, Jackson truly understood what drove her. I have to go, she said, but her tone had lost its edge. As Jackson watched her walk away, he realized he'd reached a crossroads. He could respect her wishes and stay out of it, or he could do what the old Jackson would do, leverage his power and connections to outmaneuver Kingsley. One path might win her respect but lose Phoenix. The other might save Phoenix but lose any chance with Abigail. The choice he made next would reveal whether he had truly changed or merely wanted to appear that way. 3 days passed without word from Abigail. Jackson honored her request for space, though it tested his patience like nothing in recent memory. Tara noticed his distraction during meetings, his constant checking of emails, and the way he'd stare out his office windows toward downtown, where Monarch Publishing's offices stood. "Whatever's bothering you," she finally said on Thursday morning, "fix it or delegate it. You've built an empire by making decisions, not dwelling on them." Her words echoed in his mind as he sat alone in his penthouse that evening. On his coffee table lay 2 documents, a comprehensive acquisition proposal for Monarch Publishing that would outbid Kingsley Tech, and a simpler investment offer that would provide capital while leaving ownership intact. The first represented the old Jackson, decisive, controlling, effective. The second reflected who he aspired to be, respectful of others' autonomy, even at the cost of certainty. His contemplation was interrupted by his phone ringing, Abigail's name appearing on the screen. "I need to see you," she said without preamble when he answered. "Are you home?" 40 minutes later, Abigail stood in his living room, her usual composure noticeably fractured. She paced between his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights creating a dramatic backdrop to her evident distress. "The board voted to accept Kingsley's offer," she announced. "Final papers will be signed Monday morning." Jackson kept his distance, sensing she needed space. "I'm sorry." "What about Phoenix?" "Reduced to digital-only content, released gradually over 3 years instead of my planned schedule." She stopped pacing to face him. "Kingsley personally informed me that my role would be advisory, essentially stripped of decision-making authority." Her bitter laugh held no humor. "He suggested I should be grateful they're keeping the project at all." "That's not right," Jackson said quietly. "Phoenix deserves better. You deserve better. That's actually why I'm here." Abigail took a deep breath. "I need your help, but I need it on my terms." Jackson gestured to the couch. "I'm listening." As they sat, Abigail explained her plan. She'd spent the past 3 days securing verbal commitments from key authors and illustrators who'd rather follow her than stay with a Kingsley-owned monarch. She'd approached smaller, independent publishers about taking on Phoenix, but none had the capital to launch such an ambitious project, especially with Kingsley likely to create legal obstacles. "I want to start fresh," she concluded. "Create my own publishing house focused exclusively on underrepresented historical narratives, but I need a strategic investor who understands both the business and the mission." Jackson felt hope rising, but kept his expression neutral. "And you're asking me to be that investor?" "Yes, but with conditions." Her green eyes held his with unwavering intensity. "First, it's a true partnership. You provide capital and business expertise. I maintain complete creative control. Second, we establish a foundation that ensures these books reach public schools and libraries, regardless of their budget constraints. Third," she hesitated, vulnerability briefly replacing her business demeanor. "Third, we keep our personal history and potential future separate from this venture. Whatever happens between us, or doesn't happen, Phoenix continues." Jackson considered her terms carefully. "I agree to all 3 conditions, with one amendment to the third." When she tensed, he quickly added, "The amendment is only that we acknowledge our history exists. We don't ignore it or pretend it didn't shape us. But yes, the business stands independent of our personal relationship." Abigail visibly relaxed. "I can accept that. Then we have a deal." He offered his hand and she took it, a simple handshake that somehow felt more significant than any contract he'd ever signed. They spent the next hour outlining preliminary business structures, with Abigail revealing impressive knowledge of publishing economics, and Jackson contributing his expertise on sustainable growth models. As the conversation turned to potential office spaces, Abigail suddenly laughed. "What's funny?" Jackson asked. "Us. Here, planning a business together." She shook her head in wonder. If someone had told me 2 weeks ago that I'd be sitting in Jackson Hayes' penthouse plotting a new company with him, I'd have questioned their sanity. "Life has a strange way of circling back," he agreed with a smile. "Though I'd argue it's not a circle but a spiral. We return to similar points, but hopefully at different levels." "Poetic," she teased, then grew serious. "Why did you really keep my diary, Jackson?" "The truth." He considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "Initially, because seeing your name was like seeing a ghost, and I wanted to understand who you'd become. But as I read it, I realized something I'd spent 12 years avoiding, how deeply I hurt you and how much I regretted the choices I made." "You broke my heart," she said softly. "Not because you chose your dream, but because you didn't see how your dream could include me." "I know that now," he acknowledged. "Success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with, people who challenge you, inspire you, make you better." They sat in contemplative silence until Abigail glanced at her watch. "It's late. I should go. We have a lot to accomplish before Monday if we're going to counter Kingsley's move." "Stay," Jackson said impulsively, then clarified when her eyebrows rose. "Not like that. I mean, I have 3 guest rooms. We could continue working, order dinner, plan our strategy. No pressure, no expectations." To his surprise, she agreed. "Let me get my laptop from the car." The weekend passed in a blur of productivity and rediscovery. They established a new publishing entity, Phoenix Rising Press, with Jackson providing initial funding and Abigail bringing her team and authors. They worked seamlessly together, each contributing their strengths without dominating the other. Between business discussions, they cautiously rebuilt their personal connection. Abigail shared stories of her years in New York, her failed engagement to a fellow editor who couldn't handle her ambition. Jackson opened up about his own relationship struggles, his sister's battle with cancer that had forced him to reevaluate his priorities, and his ongoing efforts to become more than just a successful businessman. By Sunday evening, they had a comprehensive business plan and legal framework ready for Monday morning. As they organized their final documents, Jackson noticed Abigail watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked. "I'm trying to reconcile the Jackson I knew with the man in front of me now," she admitted. "You've changed." "I've grown," he corrected gently. "The core is the same, just better calibrated." "Is that why you didn't try to outbid Kingsley behind my back? The old Jackson would have." He smiled ruefully. "I considered it. Had the papers drawn up and everything." He gestured to the documents still sitting on his coffee table. "But some victories aren't worth the cost." Abigail crossed the room and picked up both documents, examining them silently before meeting his gaze. "You chose respect over control. I chose you, your vision, your terms, your leadership," he said simply. "And whatever happens next, I'm proud of that choice." The next morning, they arrived together at Monarch's offices, where the board had gathered to finalize the Kingsley acquisition. The shock on Gregory's face when Abigail announced her resignation and counteroffer quickly gave way to calculation, as he realized the potential bidding war between 2 tech billionaires. Walter Kingsley was less composed, his carefully constructed deal threatening to unravel. "This is corporate sabotage," he accused Jackson. "You're only doing this because of some past relationship with her." "I'm doing this because Phoenix is revolutionary," Jackson replied calmly, "and because Abigail Bennett has the vision to make it successful. You saw a content acquisition. We see cultural impact." The board meeting extended for hours as both offers were evaluated. In the end, Monarch accepted Kingsley's acquisition offer, but with a crucial amendment. Project Phoenix would be spun off as an independent entity under Abigail's leadership, with first publication rights remaining with her new company. As they left the Monarch offices for the last time, Abigail turned to Jackson on the sidewalk. "We did it," she said, her smile radiant with triumph and something more. "You did it," he corrected her. "I just provided resources. Partners provide what the other needs," she replied, taking his hand. "I needed your resources. You needed my reminder that success isn't measured by acquisitions." Jackson intertwined his fingers with hers, feeling more complete than he had in 12 years. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Abigail said, reaching up to kiss him softly, "we build something meaningful together." As they walked toward their future, Jackson thought about the diary that had brought them back together. In its pages, he'd found not just Abigail's story, but the continuation of their own. A story of second chances, growth, and the courage to redefine success on their own terms. "I won't lose you this time," he'd promised. Looking at their joined hands and the spark of shared purpose between them, Jackson knew that this time would indeed be different. This time, they would write their story together.